watching any news lately, seems like we've been bombarded by the selecting a pope to replace this, was it Francis? The news, I can't believe how they've gone overboard with this. And as a Christian, you think this is false prophecy or false teaching. So I went online and Wayne did a good lesson on examining the biblical basis for papacy. Was Peter the first pope? Turn on TV, they say he was the first pope. Okay, and he says he has authority over, he's the head of the church. Okay, well, let's look at that. So there's 1.3 billion Catholics in America. I didn't know there was that many, but that's a lot. That refer to the Pope as a Holy Father. That's in violation of Matthew 23:9. The Pope is honored as the head of the church on earth, even though Christ possesses all authority in heaven and in earth, on earth, and is the exclusive head of the church in accordance with Matthew 28:18 and Colossians 1:18. The Catholic religion asserts their Pope is the successor of St. Peter, which they call the first Pope, and contended his authority is based on the fact that the church was founded upon Peter. Peter, the first pope. Many Catholics were advocating for a return to traditional Catholic values. I thought, return? So, looks like the Pope can change. He has authority to change whatever values that the church follows, which you can't find that in the New Testament scriptures. World leaders, they drool at his feet. The United States has an ambassador. I didn't know that. They have an ambassador supported with taxes to the Vatican, the people's little state of 108 acres. The doctrine of primacy of Peter and the papal authority supposedly derived from the Lord's apostle and the very foundation of the Roman Catholicism. However, there is no biblical support for a pope. Wayne's article briefly reflects on two ideas. First, the New Testament information regarding Peter consistent with the image of the Pope. Is the New Testament consistent with the image of the Pope? And the second part of his article, do the scriptures teach that the church of Jesus Christ was founded on the apostle Peter? Was Peter the first pope? Okay, the biblical description of the apostle Peter compared to that of the pope is a contrast of night and day. So let's consider the following. The Roman Church considers celibacy as a holier status than matrimony. This is why the Pope and many church officials cannot marry. That makes them more holier, which I didn't know that. I always wondered why they would have such a requirement. So Matthew records an incident where the Lord healed. Okay, I'm sorry, I skipped. Clearly, Peter was a married man, so he doesn't fit the requirements of the Catholic. Records record an instance where the Lord healed Peter's mother-in-law. You read about that in Matthew 8:14. And in a defense of his apostleship, Paul once said that he had as much right to have a wife as did Cephas. And Cephas is recorded as translated as Peter there too. You read about that in 1 Corinthians 9:5. Additionally, Peter was an elder in the church. Well, as an elder, guess what? You got to have one wife. You have to have kids, believing kids, children. So you can read about Peter being an elder in 1 Peter 5:11. And also about his wife's mother-in-law. You can read about that. So the mother-in-law verse is in 1 Peter 5:11, and the eldership, you can read about the requirements of elders in 1 Timothy 3:2. A survey of the news coverage of the Pope's activities reveals how many desirous, or how he desires human adoration. People bow down before him, the Pope, and he extends his hand for kisses. Even images of the Pope are kissed and adored. Picture? That's hard to comprehend, that one. By way of contrast, when the centurion Cornelius fell at Peter's feet to worship, but the apostle rebuked him. Stand up. I myself also am a man, as recorded in Acts 10:26. Peter not only refused adoration, but he sinned by hypocritically refusing to fellowship Gentiles. In doing so, Peter was openly rebuked to his face by Paul. You read about that in Galatians 2:11 and following. So was Peter the Pope in Rome? There is much information about Peter's travel activities that took him from place to place. And yet not one line in the New Testament suggests that he was ever in the city of Rome, much less exercising the authority of the church in that community. Perhaps more than 20 years after the church was established in Rome, Paul penned an epistle to the saints around AD 56. In that letter, he sent personal greetings to and mentioned more than 20 people. You read about that in Romans 16. Interestingly, he never once referred to the Holy Father, which is what they call that Pope, and they use that a lot, who was supposedly occupying the papal chair in that city. A strange circumstance if the claims of the Catholicism are true. Moreover, toward the end of his ministry, Paul spent 2 years under house arrest in Rome. How odd that the divine record never mentioned an association with the Pope. This is especially significant in light of the fact that inspiration mentions a brief 15-day trip that Paul made to Jerusalem, during which he saw Peter. Galatians 1:18. Yet 2 years in the same city with the pontiff, and not one word about it. About 20 years after the establishment of the church, a controversy arose regarding circumcision. Would Gentiles be required to receive circumcision in conjunction with their acceptance of Christianity? A council was convened in Jerusalem to discuss the matter. Had Peter been the Pope, surely he would have presided over that affair, but he did not. James, an elder in the Jerusalem church, was a leading figure. Peter was merely a testifying witness. There is simply no evidence that Peter was ever recognized as a pope. In fact, the term pope is not even found in the New Testament record. Was the church built on Peter, as the Catholics claim? Catholicism alleges that Matthew 16:18 teaches that the church was built on Peter. Jesus said, I say unto you that you are Peter. And that word is Petros in the Greek. And upon this rock, Petra, I will build my church. That's two different words. The relationship between the name Peter and the term rock forms the basis of the Catholic argument. However, the Lord took deliberate pains to draw a clear contrast between Peter and the rock to which he alluded. Note these very important points. The word translated for Peter is Petros, a masculine gender noun. The word translated as rock is Petra, a feminine form. The change in grammatical form is not incidental. The word Petros suggests a small rock, whereas Petra indicates a boulder. The contrast is significant. Jesus used the second person, Sue, translated you, when addressing Peter, but switched to the third person, Tauti translated this when referring to the rock. In this narrative, the Lord employs the symbolism of building construction to convey this point. Within the illustration, Christ is the builder. The church is the edifice, and Peter's confession that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, serves as the foundational truth on which the house of God is meant to be erected. Then hinting at Peter's privilege of proclaiming the gospel first to the Jews, Acts 2, and then to the Gentiles, Acts 10. The Lord suggested that the apostle would be granted the keys, that is, the authority to open the kingdom for others to enter. You read about that in Revelations 1:18. Peter cannot occupy two roles of both foundation and door opener in the same illustration without violating rules of symbolism. The Church of Jesus Christ was not founded on Peter. Catholicism is a corruption of the primitive Christian system. It is manifested of the great departure from the faith of which Paul warned. See 2 Thessalonians 2:1 and following, and 1 Timothy 4:1 and following. So hopefully when you hear about all this news about the Pope, I don't understand how he gets so much attention, but the world, I guess, has a different way of thinking than we do. And I think about Deuteronomy 4:2. You shall not add unto word or take away. We're only authorized to do what's in this book, and silence means something. So if it doesn't talk about the Pope, they have no authority. So if there's anyone in the audience that's subject to the invitation tonight, you're invited to come.